Hi, welcome to Section 3, Chapter 9. Here we're talking about the Constitutional Convention. We're going to cover the American pageant, hammering out a bundle of compromises all the way through a conservative triumph. Today's discussion, if you got a good grasp on the Constitution and what came out of this convention in Philadelphia in 1787, it makes American government a lot easier and maybe explain some of the mumbled mess we have during the election years, like what's going on right now. So you have the Constitutional Convention. You have 55 white dudes hanging out in Philadelphia. Previously, they decided to revise. They were supposed to revise the Articles of Confederation. Instead, they scrap it. They also banned the public and the press from any of the hearings. And immediately, they have two proposals for the new government. The first proposal was the Virginia Plan by James Madison, who was named the father of the Constitution. We don't know who the mother is. We're still waiting on the DNA test. Maybe Maury Povich could solve it. Maybe it's Lady Liberty, but we're not sure. The Virginia Plan is pretty much what the American government is today. You can see a lot of the similarities here. It called upon a bicameral legislature, which is two houses, not two camels, not a two-hump camel. We're not talking Lawrence of Arabia here. The upper house was the Senate, where each state got two. The lower house was representation based on population, and that house would be directly elected by the people, and which was giving some democratic elements to this stronger government that has a definite aristocratic tinge to it. The upper house was appointed by the state governments, and each state would have equal representation. Well, that's eventually what would happen. That wasn't really the case to start, so I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm sorry. There would be a chief executive. There would be someone to carry out the laws of the land, someone to enforce the law, somebody to squash mob rule or rebellions, and to act if there's an emergency. There would be court systems. So basically, you have the three branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. Yay. Immediately, these small states countered and said this isn't fair. They proposed the New Jersey plan, which is pretty much the Articles of Confederation with a couple changes. Each state got one vote, so protecting the rights of the smaller states. Congress, though, gained the rights to levy taxes and regulate trade. And they would also have a weak executive, a president of sorts that didn't do much. And these were the two proposals, and they just argued back and forth: big state, little state, populous state, unpopulated state. Can control this, and they couldn't figure it out for a long time. They spent a lot of time, a lot of days arguing in the sweltering heat in Philadelphia, a lot of nights at the city tavern, drinking port and other things that they like to drink there, and beer. So there was deadlock over these two plans until the Great Compromise came to be. The Great Compromise, somebody just finally said, well, what if we blended the two, put them in a pot and stirred it or something? I don't know. So it blends the two plans. The lower house would be based on population, which keeps Virginia happy. Hey, Virginia, that's good. And the upper house, two officials per state, so each state would be equal, which makes New Jersey and the smaller states very happy as well. Immediately, though, the South said, well, okay, cool, we can count people. Can we count our slaves? And the North went, no, they don't have any rights. They can't vote. And then they put there are slaves. And so, to me, one of the low points of American history, they actually negotiated what a slave was worth in terms of adding to their population, adding to the power of these states that had slaves. I mean, so the North wanted zero, the South wanted one. And there was some type of negotiation that went back and forth for them to come up with three-fifths compromise. Basically, for every 5 slaves a southern state had, they got to add 3 to their total. A slave was worth 3/5 of a person in terms of representation. Pretty awful. To equate a person as 3/5 of a person. So each slave is worth 3/5 of a person, though the word slavery is not actually used in the Constitution, actually until the 13th Amendment when they banned it. They had some servitude things kind of going on there, different languages. And then they also, as a compromise, in return, the South agreed to ban slave trade from foreign countries in 20 years. So in the year 1807, that would be the last year that slaves could be brought directly from Africa. The North hoped that through this compromise, eventually slavery would die out because it was on its way out at this point, except for this guy named Eli Whitney who made cotton profitable, and we'll talk about that later. And then they had another compromise with the Electoral College. Many people wanted the people to elect the president, the chief executive, who would become later the most powerful person in government. At this time, they didn't know what the president really was going to do or how powerful it would be. Congress believed Congress would be the most powerful branch. That's why Article 1 is the longest of the Constitution, because they were very specific with Congress. The president and the executive branch, Article 2 was a little bit shorter. Article 3, the judicial branch, are like, yeah, we got some courts too. You guys figure that out. So anyway, back to the Electoral College, the idea was let the people choose or let Congress choose. They already felt Congress had too much power, and yet they didn't trust the people because they were country bumpkins and idiots and drunks, and they were mobbed, so they didn't want them, so they compromised. And that's what our whole system of government was based on, is compromise. And what it was is the Electoral College, which we kind of know it was different back then. The electors, the people that would select the president, were appointed by the state representatives, the state legislatures, not voted on by the people. That slowly changed. Each state kind of changed their constitutions. And by 1820s, 1830s, the people are voting for the electors. And then you fast forward a little bit in the 1800s, you're voting for the candidate, and then there's representatives or electors that go vote for them. It's still a mess, and most people don't understand the Electoral College still today. And then at the very end, they said, hey, you want to have a Bill of Rights? And they went, we don't need that. We don't need a blue Bill of Rights. They're all natural rights. They're just there. And some people went, we want it on paper. No, they're just there. You have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They're just there. And still people said, no, we really want it in paper, just in case some crazy people, I don't know, someday want to take our guns or something. The proposal for a Bill of Rights was defeated, and the final Constitution was short. In terms of average words, it's significantly shorter than most of the modern constitutions of today. In the time that the United States has had this one constitution, France has had 16 of them. Good job, France. It's based on common law instead of civil law. And so common law is a legal tradition that you don't have to be so specific about everything. There's room for interpretation, which is why the Constitution has lasted so long, is it's kind of morphed and evolved over the years to fit the needs of America. Here's the evolution of our federal union. You can see all the things that went on, the steps to finally getting our federal Constitution. Oh, I hit the wrong button. I am so sorry. Here's the Constitutional Convention. They're sitting around. It's hot. Washington's chilling. Yeah, it's cool. Now, the convention agreed economically onto some things. They demanded a sound money policy. They also wanted protection of private property. That's why we have the executive branch. Alexander Hamilton, under the tutelage of Robert Morris, is the one who really pushes this sound money, basically, agreements. And what they do is they get rid of state money. And Congress gets the sole right to coin money and levy taxes and all that. Well, not sole right to levy taxes, but all that state money goes away. They agreed politically. They favored a stronger government. They favored the three branches of our government we have in a checks and balance system. Basically, they set up a system where no branch can rule as a tyranny over the others. There's always a way for them to check. People hear checks and balances and they think banking, but a check is more like hockey. Somebody's skating along and they're getting too good and they're getting ahead, so you check them into the boards and you stop them in their track because they're trying to abuse power. What it does is it prevents democracy, which you're probably scratching your head going, but I thought we were a democracy. We're a republic. We elect people to go do that job for us. We don't vote on every single issue. We do not have a direct democracy. We don't vote whether or not some podunk town in Delaware gets a bridge or not. We elect people to go do that for us. So it's not a democracy. We're not the rule of the people. In fact, in the original Constitution, only one entity was voted on by the people. That was the House of Representatives, which they only served for 2-year terms. And so that's, it kind of showed what they viewed the people, how they viewed the people in America. They thought Americans were dumb, uneducated, and emotional. And so if you read a lot of the quotes of our founding fathers, they did not like democracy. They did not like the people in charge. And so they set up this natural aristocracy. And you could say that, yeah, they tricked us because the first three words of the Constitution said, "We the people." Um, but they didn't want the people in charge. They wanted the elite in charge. And maybe that's a facetious, kind of slanted view to take of it. But based on the evidence that I've read, it kind of seems that way. It still has democratic elements. The power is from the consent of the governed. It's still a social contract. Like I said, it starts with "we, the people of the United States of America." It does have limited government, tracing back all the way to the Magna Carta in 1215, that the government doesn't have absolute power. To approve the Constitution, they signed it on September 17th, 1787. 42 signed it, actually 39. It's kind of iffy. There's three guys in there. Not really sure what's going on here. It says 42. The remainder, adjourning to the city tavern, celebrated the occasion. This is a picture of the city tavern, where most of our founding fathers ate and drank during this convention. The original burned to the ground, but it's kind of fun. It's kind of kitschy. You go there and they're dressed in colonial outfits, and they have candlelights, and they still have like Pepsi or Diet Pepsi, but they have traditional drinks and food from the colonial era. To ratify, which was a monumental thing for them to get passed, instead of all 13 states approving, like the Articles of Confederation, they only need a two-thirds majority. Only 9 states to ratify it. And so that becomes kind of the, what's going on here. A little quick overview of the structure of the American government. You have Article 1, which is the legislative branch. Their chief duty is to make laws. Congress has 2 houses, the lower house, the House of Representatives. Based on population, the more people you have, the more representation you have. Colorado, for instance, has 7. Wyoming has 1. 53 representatives are from California. They serve 2-year terms. The upper house, the Senate, every state gets 2. They serve 6-year terms. Article 2, the executive branch, which enforces or executes the laws. You have the president, who serves a 4-year term along with the vice president. It also includes the cabinet and all the bureaucracy, all the entities and agencies that carry out the functions of the government. The FBI, the military, the CIA, the police officers, even teachers. We are functions of state governments. We're part of the executive branch. The judicial branch, which is Article 3, interprets the laws to determine whether or not you broke the law, whether or not a law violated the Constitution. It is headed by the Supreme Court, which they serve for a lifetime term. They are appointed by the president and approved by the Senate. You also have a series of federal courts, which were started by the Congress later on. Let me go back there. A nice analogy to kind of remember the duties of each branch was the legislative branch. I like to think of it with food, because we all love food and we're Americans, so we're fat, like myself. The legislative branch, they write recipes. They write a cookbook. And then the executive branch, they take that recipe and they cook the food. And then the judicial branch, they get to taste the food and see if it meets the recipe or not, or if they did a bad job. So just when you want to do that, just think of food and it helps out. The other thing is kind of cool is the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. All laws in America have to agree with it. And the 3 branches of government, basically we have those in all levels of government. The state governments have a state legislature. They have a governor who's the executive branch. They have state courts. You can go all the way down to your local town or city. You have a city council or a board of trustees, which is the legislative branch. You have a mayor who's the executive branch, and you still have town judges and all that stuff. So here's a little visual representation of all the stuff that's going on. Some other components. The federal system, there are shared powers among the levels of government. So you have the 3 branches, and then you have 3 branches in each level of government, meaning that, that like I just mentioned, there are the 3 branches at each level. They also share power. Each level of government can tax you, for instance. The federal government, the state government, the local government, your HOA, I don't know, you can go down the line. The Constitution was the supreme law of the land. They have separation of powers through the 3 branches. And then you have checks and balances. Each branch can prevent abuses of power from the others. For instance, to pass a bill, both houses of Congress have to pass the identical bill. The president has to sign it, or he can veto it. But then if Congress wants, they can override the veto with a 2/3 majority. There's more of that. That's government, though. This is history. There's a nice little visual representation if you want to take a look at that and really kind of get a feel for checks and balances. So the big next showdown is whether or not to ratify this new government. And there were people that were opposed to it because it was too strong. It was overbearing. It was almost like having the British back. They said it was taking away the power of the common man. And the people that opposed it are called the Anti-Federalists. They were led by Samuel Adams, Patrick Henry, Richard Henry Lee, all of which were not invited to the convention because they were too radical. They were too liberal and they wanted to give too much power to the people. Mostly they consisted of the poorest class. They represented the people, and they just thought that there was too much stuff going on. There was too much power to the government, and they're taking away the rights of the commoners. Thomas Paine, who wrote Common Sense, he was very opposed to the Constitution. He's the one that urged us to declare independence. Said the government is best which governs least. He would be a libertarian today, by the way. They also, many of them said, yeah, it's a good idea, but we'd like to have a Bill of Rights. We'd like to have in writing our actual freedoms and not just assume we're on, Scout's honor with your rights. And then you have the Federalists on the other side who support this new government, this strong government. They're led by George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, all of which I believe, I'm not sure about John Jay, attended the Constitutional Convention. They were wealthier, they were more educated, and better organized than the Anti-Federalists. They wrote a series of papers supporting the Constitution called the Federalist Papers. The most famous of which was Federalist Paper number 10. Most of them were written by Alexander Hamilton. John Jay helped a lot on some of these too. They also controlled the press, which if you control the press, you can control the people. Donald Trump thinks that's going on because the election's rigged according to him. And so they published the Federalist Papers. So this is a little comparison of the Articles of Confederation versus the Federal Constitution. If you need a little bit of practice, just pause the video and kind of look at this right here. Here's what's going on here where the Federalists were strongest. You can see, really in the middle states, really along the coast. The Anti-Federalists were in New England, of course, because they're always troublemakers. And as you go westward, so that's what's kind of going on there. Delaware was the first state to ratify the Constitution. They were the first state to approve it. Ratify is a fancy word to approve. And so Delaware gets the claim to fame that we're the first state. We're number one, which I think that's the only thing Delaware is number one in, because I don't think you can think of anything fun or memorable or exciting about Delaware except that sign, "Welcome to Delaware." I drove through Delaware for a half hour once. Got charged like $10 in tolls, stopped at a gas station in the middle of the highway, bought some beef jerky, and got the you-know-what out of there. No way, Delaware. Massachusetts narrowly passed it. Yeah, they were very close to defeating it because they wanted more rights and more liberties, 187 to 168. The Anti-Federalists actually held a majority in Massachusetts, but John Adams and Hancock eventually... Samuel Adams, eventually endorsed it because they were promised a Bill of Rights, and that switched a lot of the Anti-Federalists. In 1788, New Hampshire became the 9th state to ratify the Constitution, making it technically the law of the land, but the two most populated states, New York and Virginia, had not done anything with it, and both states had strong Anti-Federalist sentiments, and so without those two very populated, powerful states, the Constitution has no teeth. It has no bite. It has no weight to it. Virginia, New York, North Carolina, and Rhode Island were the only states to not sign it right away. They're called the Laggard States. They're lollygagging around. So here's the order of states that they ratified the Constitution. You can see also their rank and population and the vote to ratify it. Virginia ratified finally passed and ratified the Constitution after a guarantee of a Bill of Rights by 10 votes. They also feared that if they didn't do this because they're already in the process of forming a national government, that George Washington, the natural choice for this new executive position called the president, would not be elected. So to ensure Washington won, Virginia kind of rushed this through, and with the promise of the Bill of Rights. New York narrowly passed it, even though the Anti-Federalists also had a majority by 3 votes. Madison and Hamilton, friends at the time, worked diligently there. They wrote paper after paper, influencing, debating, trying to get whatever they could to get New York to pass it. Federalist Paper number 10 is the most influential in terms of turning the tide of voters to ratify this new government. They also didn't want to lose having the capital. The capital of the United States was going to be in New York City, and if New York doesn't didn't ratify the Constitution, it would have stayed in Philadelphia. So there's a little bit of other motives for these states for finally approving the Constitution. Eventually, all 13 states would approve it, although Rhode Island would approve it 1 full year after it was, it actually goes into effect. Good job, Rhode Island, proving you're a state once again. Losers. The Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, were actually added in 1791. So that promise was fulfilled. James Madison wrote them. There was actually 12 proposed amendments, but 10 were ratified. Like I said, Virginia and New York eventually ratified the Constitution before it was put into effect. Rhode Island and North Carolina were the last 2 states to ratify it, but they did so after the new government had been in operation for a few months. They even had an election, so they were kind of just late to the game. Like I said, these 4 states did not want to ratify the Constitution, but they wanted to safely exist as the states outside of the fold, so they eventually did so. There's other things going on as well. There's the Bill of Rights. Probably should know those. First 10 amendments, people usually remember the first 2. Those other ones are very important. That's more for government class. Here's some stuff going on. Looks like the banner paraded of the Society of Pewters in New York. They were promoting the government there. And so finally, the conservative triumphed. The architects of the Constitution believed that every branch, the executive, judiciary, and legislative branch, efficiently represented the people. They thought this was a triumph of strong government, but it was still a government that protected the people. It was still a government that had the people's interests in mind, but it created order. Others said we replaced an oppressive, tax-heavy government headed by a white guy named George, with a government that was oppressive and tax-heavy, and we had a white guy named George in charge. King George III, President George I. You make the call. I'm not sure. It's up to you. Here's an old cartoon about what happens if these 2 states don't ratify the Constitution. Little chronology. If you want to pause it, you can look at it. Here's some questions if you want to practice. If you have any questions or comments, put them in the comments. Hope you guys enjoyed this. You'll learn a lot more of this in government. If you have any questions, let me know.